The second Trump administration features policies that bring both challenges and opportunities for traditional U.S. allies and partners. Some of these ring familiar from President Trump's first term, but others are entirely new and paradigm-shifting in their impact. CSIS has undertaken a study over the past 9 months looking at how U.S. allies and partners around the world in Europe, Asia, Africa, Western Hemisphere, and the Middle East are responding to and coping with U.S. policies. Of course, U.S. policies are not the only things in flux today. Paradigmatic shifts in U.S. foreign policy take place in the context of disruptive changes in the global order, wars in Ukraine and Gaza, U.S.-China competition, coordination among autocratic actors, and the weaponization of trade and finance by the two largest economic actors in the global economy amplify the challenges faced by allies and partners. This CSIS study from our new Geopolitics and Foreign Policy Department defines for each ally or region the policy shifts in Washington that are most significant, as well as a range of actions being undertaken to manage relations and to preserve interests. In most cases, the U.S. exercise of power under Trump has been effective for now in the sense that allies and partners are trying to accommodate the president. Most do so because they want to preserve the long-term relationship with Washington and want to find opportunities for new areas of cooperation. But how long they will accommodate this new U.S. approach is unclear. We have distilled 7 common strategies that are being adopted in allied capitals.
The first strategy is seek a face-to-face meeting. Given the centralized decision-making apparatus in the Trump administration, allies are seeking leader-to-leader meetings as a first step, skipping more traditional working-level engagements that build up to senior-level meetings. Japan, for example, whose Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba met with President Trump in Washington very early after the inauguration, is hoping Trump will meet with its incoming Prime Minister during a likely visit to Tokyo in late October, shortly after the new PM is named.
The second strategy, minimize risk. Allies and partners realize they're not going to be able to get President Trump to avoid his policy goals, and they have to come to terms, and they try to minimize the damage. They do this by engaging the president, by engaging the administration in negotiations to try to find a way to negotiate President Trump down from his maximalist goals. We saw this with the European Union, which initially tried to negotiate a reciprocal trade agreement, realizing that Trump was not going to go for it, accepted a 15% tariff on the European Union, and decided not to retaliate. Why? Because they wanted to minimize the risk, not just on Europe's economy, but also on the broader transatlantic relationship. We've seen this from allies and partners around the world trying to minimize the damage to their bilateral relations with the United States. The third strategy, flatter the leader. Allies avoid disagreements with President Trump, particularly in front of the camera, focusing instead on superficial flattery. They all seek to avoid a Zelensky moment, and they come to the White House praising the president, hoping that this praise will lead President Trump to both think highly of them as leaders and their country, and that this will avoid any negative fallout to their bilateral relations with the United States.
The fourth strategy is prepare headline summitry deliverables. US allies come to summits prepared with large, flashy packages of incentives that President Trump can trumpet as wins. At the NATO summit in June, almost all NATO member states committed to raising their defense and security spending to 5% of GDP by 2035, something President Trump has long called for. And Gulf states pledged more than $2 trillion in investment deals. However, allies operate with the tacit understanding that not all of the commitments may actually need to be fulfilled.
The fifth strategy is practice self-help. Allies and partners, especially outside of the European Union, are practicing self-help, seeking individual bilateral deals that address immediate problems, such as U.S. tariffs, rather than banding together to compare notes and exercise leverage in response to Washington. This kind of approach might be seen as the best strategy to forestall near-term challenges, but it doesn't take advantage of the potential benefits longer term of joint approaches with other similarly affected U.S. partners.
The sixth strategy is to identify contingency plans. Allies have accelerated efforts to diversify their trading and security partnerships as insurance against U.S. withdrawal from its longstanding commitments, and also as an implicit form of leverage vis-a-vis Washington. But it will be exceedingly difficult for allies to fill a U.S.-sized hole. And at the end of the day, there is no commensurate alternative to the U.S. market or a U.S. security guarantee. At the same time, China is arguing that nervous U.S. allies should pivot towards Beijing, putting forward a narrative in which Beijing's supposedly steady leadership is a better bet than a volatile Washington. So far, the allies aren't buying it, and many are working together to push back on Chinese aggression. But if the United States remains an unreliable partner over the longer term, it will become harder and harder for allies to exclude China from their contingency plans.
The seventh strategy is maximize reward. Given the flux created by US policies, allies identify opportunities to find new areas of cooperation that align with their interests and capitalize on them, while giving Trump the credit. South Korea is capitalizing on Trump's willingness to partner with foreign shipbuilders, while African leaders have welcomed the Trump administration's commercial diplomacy strategy that prioritizes trade over aid. Shifting US policies create positive-sum solutions for the United States and its allies.